The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a silver probe that appeared without warning in Earth's solar system. The probe moved past Jupiter's moons and sailed through the asteroid belt like it owned the space. No human ship tried to stop it. They couldn't. The probe was faster than anything humanity had ever built. Ambassador Elena Vasquez was drinking coffee in her quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel Defiance when the alarm bells started ringing. She set down her cup and walked to the bridge, her boots clicking against the metal floor. The crew was gathered around the main screen, their faces pale and worried. "What is it?" Elena asked. Captain Morrison pointed at the screen. "Take a look at this, Ambassador. The probe sent us this message and then disappeared." The screen showed words in perfect English, though Elena knew the message had arrived in every human language at once. The text was simple and cold. "To the species known as humanity, you are summoned to appear before the Galactic Council. Location, Nexus Prime Station. Time 72 standard hours from receipt of this message. Purpose, to answer charges of unfitness for galactic citizenship. Failure to appear will result in immediate quarantine from all galactic territories and trade routes. This summons is final." Elena read the message twice. Around her, the bridge crew whispered among themselves. She had expected this day would come, but not so soon. Humanity had been expanding fast, maybe too fast. In just 50 years, they had spread from Earth to 12 different star systems. They had built colonies, mining stations, and defense platforms. They had fought off pirate attacks and defended their territory against raiders. But they had also ignored the suggestions from the older alien species. The suggestions that humanity should slow down, that they should ask permission before building new colonies, that they should follow the rules that other species had followed for thousands of years. "Ma'am?" Captain Morrison was waiting for her response. "Set course for Nexus Prime," Elena said. "Best speed. Ambassador, that's in the heart of Council space. It'll take us 3 days just to get there. Then we better leave now." As the Defiance jumped to faster-than-light speed, Elena returned to her quarters. She sat at her desk and opened her files on the Galactic Council. The Council was older than human civilization. It was made up of 847 different alien species. Some were so advanced that they had given up physical bodies entirely. Others controlled entire galaxies. A few had technologies that could destroy stars. At the top of the Council sat the ethereal Dominion, led by Council Prime Zethkar. The ethereals had transcended physical form millions of years ago. They existed as pure energy, moving between dimensions at will. They considered themselves the wisest beings in the galaxy. They had never been wrong about anything, or so they claimed. Elena had met Zethkar once before during humanity's first contact with the Council 5 years ago. The ethereal had appeared as a shifting cloud of blue light, speaking without words directly into her mind. The conversation had been brief and unpleasant. Zethkar had made it clear that humanity was barely worth noticing. They were children playing with dangerous toys, he had said. They would learn their place in time, but humanity had not learned their place. Instead, they had kept expanding, kept building, kept fighting when other species would have backed down. Elena remembered the incident at Kepler Station, where human Marines had fought off a raider attack instead of evacuating. The raiders had been 3 times stronger, but the humans had refused to give up. They had saved the station and everyone on it. The Council had called it reckless and inefficient. They said the proper response would have been to evacuate and rebuild elsewhere. They could not understand why humans would fight impossible battles to save lives. Elena understood, though. It was what made humans human. On the second day of their journey, Elena received reports from other human colonies. The message had been delivered everywhere at once. All of humanity knew about the summons. Some colonies were panicking. Others were preparing for war. The military wanted to send a battle fleet to Nexus Prime. Elena had said no. She would go alone with just her small diplomatic team. If the Council wanted to judge humanity, they would see humanity at its best. Not its most armed, but its most human. The Defiance dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the edge of the Nexus Prime system on the 3rd day. Elena stood on the bridge and stared at the massive space station ahead of them. Nexus Prime was a marvel of alien engineering. It was shaped like a giant sphere, 50 kilometers across, with docking ports for thousands of ships. The surface was covered in crystal formations that caught and reflected light from the system's twin suns. Around the station, Elena could see ships from dozens of different species. There were the organic vessels of the collective swarms, looking like giant insects made of bone and metal. The geometric ships of the Synth-Arcs hung in perfect formation, their surfaces covered in equations that shifted and changed. Energy beings from the photonic entities moved through space without ships at all, their forms leaving trails of colored light. "Ambassador," the communications officer called out, "we're getting a signal from Nexus Prime. They're assigning us a docking port." "Put it through," Elena said. The voice that came through the speakers was mechanical and cold. "Human vessel Defiance, you are assigned to docking port 77 Alpha. This is a restricted port for primitive species. Follow the guidance beacons. Do not deviate from your assigned course." Elena felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "Understood, Nexus Prime, beginning docking approach." As the Defiance moved toward the station, Elena could see other ships at the primitive species ports. They were smaller vessels, clearly inferior to the massive ships docked at the main ports. The message was clear. Humanity was being put in its place before the trial even began. The docking was smooth, and Elena gathered her small team. There were only 5 of them: herself, Captain Morrison, Dr. Sarah Chen from the Xenobiology Department, Lieutenant Commander Jake Williams from Military Intelligence, and Maria Santos, her aide and translator. As they walked through the airlock into Nexus Prime, Elena felt the weight of 847 alien civilizations pressing down on her. The corridor was huge, designed for species much larger than humans. The walls were covered in symbols and equations that hurt to look at directly. The air tasted strange, filtered through systems designed for dozens of different atmospheric requirements. They were met by a guide, a floating robot that spoke in the same mechanical voice they had heard before. "Follow me to your assigned quarters. The trial begins in 18 standard hours. You will be called when it is time." As they walked through the station, Elena saw aliens she had only heard about in reports, beings made of living crystal, creatures that looked like walking trees, entities that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. All of them stopped to stare at the humans as they passed. Elena could feel their contempt. That night, alone in her quarters, Elena stood at the window and looked out at the stars. Tomorrow she would stand before the most powerful alliance in the known galaxy. They would judge whether humanity deserved to exist among the stars or be locked away on their 12 small worlds forever. Elena had no fancy weapons, no advanced technology, no ancient wisdom. She had only her conviction that humanity belonged among the stars, not because they were perfect, but because they were still trying to become something better. She turned away from the window and began to prepare for the trial that would decide the fate of her entire species. The trial chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room Elena had ever seen. It stretched up so high that the ceiling disappeared into darkness above. The walls curved outward in a perfect circle, covered with thousands of viewing platforms where alien delegates sat in judgment. Each platform was designed for different species with different needs. Some held creatures that needed to float in special gases. Others contained beings of pure energy who flickered like captured lightning. Elena and her small team sat in the center of the enormous room on what could only be called the defendant's platform. It was small and simple, clearly designed to make whoever sat there feel insignificant. Around them, translation devices hummed and clicked, converting the sounds and thoughts of hundreds of different species into something approaching communication. The air in the chamber felt heavy with age and authority. This room had seen the judgment of species for millions of years. Civilizations had risen and fallen based on decisions made in this very place. Elena could feel the weight of all that history pressing down on her shoulders. Above them all, on the highest platform carved from what looked like crystallized starlight, sat Council Prime Zethkar. The ethereal leader appeared as a shifting mass of blue and silver energy, roughly humanoid in shape but constantly changing. When Zethkar spoke, the words appeared directly in the minds of everyone present, bypassing the need for translation. "We are gathered to judge the species known as humanity." Zethkar's voice echoed in Elena's head. "They stand accused of unfitness for galactic citizenship. Let the evidence be presented." The first to speak was Coordinator Prime Vexhall of the Synth-Arcs. The Synth-Arcs were a species that had long ago replaced their biological bodies with mechanical ones, in pursuit of perfect logic. Vexhal appeared as a geometric collection of silver triangles and circles that rearranged themselves as it spoke. The humans have expanded into 12 star systems in only 50 standard years. Vexhal stated, its voice emotionless and precise. This rate of expansion is illogical and dangerous. Our mathematical models show that such rapid growth leads to resource depletion and territorial conflicts. The logical response would have been to seek permission from the Council before any expansion beyond their home system. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Elena kept her face neutral, but she felt anger building in her chest. Humanity had asked for guidance when they first developed faster-than-light travel. The Council's response had been to tell them to wait for further instructions. Those instructions had never come. The next speaker was Queen of All Voices Sithika from the collective swarms. The swarm species existed as a hive mind, with billions of insect-like creatures controlled by a single consciousness. The Queen appeared as a writhing mass of chitinous bodies that spoke in perfect unison. The humans refused to accept proper guidance from their betters, the Queen declared. When we offered to manage their expansion through our efficient collective decision-making process, they rejected us. They insist on maintaining individual consciousness and making emotional decisions. This is clearly the behavior of an immature species that cannot govern itself. Elena remembered that offer. The collective swarms had wanted to absorb human consciousness into their hive mind, promising efficiency and unity in exchange for individual thought. The human response had been polite but firm. No thank you. Speaker of Lights Ralden from the photonic entities was next. The energy beings existed as pure consciousness within electromagnetic fields, and Ral then appeared as a constantly shifting aurora of colors. The humans engage in violence when retreat would be wiser, Ral then said, its voice like music made of light. We have observed them fighting battles they cannot win, suffering losses to defend abstract concepts like honor and freedom. A truly evolved species would recognize that survival is more important than such primitive emotions. The evidence presentation continued for hours. Species after species stood to present their case against humanity. The temporal scholars accused humans of being stuck in linear time perception. The void walkers criticized human attachment to physical matter. The dream weavers found human imagination chaotic and uncontrolled. Each criticism was delivered with the casual superiority of beings who had long ago solved all their problems and reached perfection. To them, humanity was like a child playing with fire, too stupid to realize they were going to get burned. The most damaging testimony came from High Arbiter Glondax of the Sacred Geometrists. The Geometrists were an ancient species that had discovered the mathematical foundations of reality itself. They appeared as living equations, symbols and numbers that floated in complex patterns. We have calculated the probability matrices for human development, Glondax announced, its form shifting through thousands of mathematical configurations. In 73.6% of possible futures, humanity destroys itself within the next 1,000 years. In 21.2% of futures, they destroy other species along with themselves. Only 5.2% of probability paths show them achieving stable civilization. These numbers make them too dangerous to remain free among the stars. The chamber filled with sounds of agreement from the assembled delegates. Elena felt her heart sink. How could she argue against mathematics itself? How could emotion and hope compete with cold probability? Dr. Chen leaned over and whispered in Elena's ear. Ambassador, their calculations assume humanity doesn't change or grow. They're treating us like a static equation instead of a living species. Elena nodded, filing that thought away for later. Around them, more species added their voices to the condemnation. The Crystal Collective found humans too chaotic for crystalline perfection. The Time Shepherds accused them of wasting temporal resources. The Gravity Dancers criticized their crude understanding of space-time. With each testimony, the chamber grew more convinced that humanity was a threat that needed to be contained. Elena could see it in the way the aliens shifted in their seats, in the increasing frequency of agreement sounds, in the way some delegates had already started to leave. Considering the matter settled, finally, Council Prime Zethkar raised what might have been a hand, and the chamber fell silent. The evidence is clear, Zethkar declared. The species known as humanity is unfit for galactic citizenship. They are too violent, too emotional, too unpredictable. They expand without permission, fight battles they cannot win, and refuse guidance from their betters. The recommendation of this council is immediate quarantine. They will be confined to their current territories and forbidden from further expansion until they prove they have evolved beyond their primitive nature. Elena felt the weight of those words settle over her like a burial shroud. Quarantine meant the end of human exploration, the end of their dreams of reaching the stars. It meant being trapped forever in their small corner of space while the rest of the galaxy moved on without them. However, Zethkar continued, the ancient laws of the Council require that the accused be given opportunity to speak in their defense. Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the human species, you may present your case. Elena stood slowly, feeling the eyes of 847 alien civilizations focused on her. The translation devices hummed louder as they prepared to carry her words to beings that existed in dimensions she couldn't even imagine. Some of the aliens in the upper galleries were already moving toward the exits, clearly considering this a formality before the inevitable guilty verdict. Elena looked up at Zethkar's shifting energy form, then let her gaze sweep across the massive chamber. She had prepared a speech. She had practiced arguments about human potential, about the value of diversity, about the contributions humanity could make to galactic civilization. She had pages of careful diplomatic language designed to appeal to alien logic and ancient protocols. But standing there in that enormous chamber, surrounded by beings who had already decided her species was unworthy, Elena realized that no speech would change their minds. These creatures had achieved perfection in their own eyes. They had transcended physical form, conquered time and space, built civilizations that lasted millions of years. What could a young species like humanity possibly tell them that they didn't already know? The answer, Elena realized, was exactly that. Humanity could tell them something they had forgotten in their millions of years of perfection and stagnation. They could remind the galaxy what it meant to still be growing, still be learning, still be becoming something more. Elena walked to the center of the platform and looked up at the assembled delegates. The chamber had grown quiet except for the soft humming of translation devices and the distant sounds of alien breathing, or whatever passed for breathing among energy beings and living equations. She opened her mouth to speak, knowing that the next words out of her mouth would either save her species or doom them to eternal isolation among the stars. Elena stood in the center of the vast chamber, feeling smaller than she ever had in her life. Above her, thousands of alien beings waited to hear humanity's defense. Most of them had already made up their minds. She could see it in their postures, in the way some delegates were gathering their belongings, in the casual indifference that radiated from the upper galleries. The translation devices around her hummed expectantly, ready to carry her words to species that communicated through light patterns, chemical signals, mathematical equations, and pure thought. Whatever she said would be heard by every delegate in their own native language, interpreted through their own cultural understanding. Elena had spent the past 18 hours preparing for this moment. She had written speeches about human achievements, about their potential contributions to galactic society, about the value of diversity and growth. She had prepared careful arguments designed to appeal to alien logic and ancient traditions. But standing there under the weight of so much accumulated wisdom and power, Elena realized that all her prepared words were useless. These beings had heard such arguments before from hundreds of other species over millions of years. Some of those species had been granted citizenship. Others had been judged wanting and consigned to isolation. The Council had procedures for everything, protocols that had been refined over eons of experience. Council Prime Zethkar's energy form shifted impatiently above her. Ambassador Vasquez, the Council awaits your defense of your species. Present your arguments for why humanity should be granted continued freedom among the stars. Elena looked up at the ethereal leader, then let her gaze sweep across the chamber. In the lower galleries, she could see species she recognized from her studies. The Synth-Arcs sat in perfect geometric formations, their mechanical bodies gleaming under the chamber's strange lighting. The collective swarms moved in constant unity, thousands of individual creatures acting as one mind. The photonic entities flickered and pulsed, their energy forms creating complex light patterns that probably represented some form of communication. Higher up were the truly ancient species. The Time Shepherds existed partially outside normal temporal flow, appearing as half-faded images that seemed to shift between past and future. The Void Walkers were barely visible as distortions in space itself. The Dreamweavers appeared as impossible geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. All of them were perfect in their own way. All of them had solved the problems that still plagued humanity. They had conquered death, transcended physical limitations, achieved harmony within their societies. They represented millions of years of evolution and advancement, and yet Elena realized they were all here. They were all part of this council, all following the same ancient procedures, all thinking the same ancient thoughts. For all their perfection, they had become static. They had reached the end of their growth and stopped. Ambassador, Zethkar's voice carried a note of warning. The council's time is valuable. Present your defense or accept judgment. Elena nodded slowly. She walked to the exact center of the defendant's platform and looked up at the assembled delegates. Many were no longer paying attention. Some were conducting side conversations in languages that registered on her instruments as pure mathematics, or controlled gravitational waves. Others were simply waiting for this tedious formality to end so they could move on to more important matters. Honored delegates of the Galactic Council, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. You have presented evidence that humanity is too young, too violent, too emotional, and too unpredictable to be trusted with freedom among the stars. A few delegates turned their attention back to her, perhaps surprised by her direct acknowledgement of their criticisms. You have calculated our probability of failure, Elena continued. You have measured our expansion rate and found it excessive. You have observed our tendency to fight losing battles and found it inefficient. You have offered us guidance and seen us refuse it, marking us as stubborn and unwise. More aliens were listening now, curious about where this human was going with her argument. Elena could feel Captain Morrison's tension behind her, could sense Dr. Chen and Lieutenant Commander Williams waiting to see if their species would live free or die in isolation. You are ancient and wise, Elena said, her voice growing stronger. You have built civilizations that span galaxies. You have technologies that can reshape reality itself. You have achieved perfection in ways humanity cannot even imagine. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. This was what they expected to hear, acknowledgement of their superiority, followed by a plea for mercy based on human potential for improvement. Elena paused, letting the silence stretch. She could feel the weight of expectation, the assumption that she would now begin her desperate plea for humanity's survival. Instead, she looked directly up at Council Prime Zethkar's energy form. Given all of that, Elena said, her voice cutting through the vast chamber with crystal clarity, I have just one question for this council. The chamber grew quieter. Even the delegates who had been preparing to leave stopped and turned their attention back to the small human, standing alone in the center of the room. Zethkar's form shifted, colors swirling more rapidly. What question would you pose to beings far beyond your understanding, Ambassador? Elena felt time slow around her. This was the moment. Everything depended on what she said next. Not just for humanity, but for what humanity represented. For the idea that growth mattered more than perfection, that becoming was more important than being, that the struggle to improve was more valuable than the peace of stagnation. She thought of the human colonies scattered across 12 star systems. Miners on airless asteroids who worked in dangerous conditions because someone had to extract the materials needed for expansion. Terraforming engineers who spent their entire lives trying to make dead worlds suitable for life. Marines who fought impossible battles to defend civilians they had never met. Scientists who asked questions even when the answers might be dangerous. She thought of children on Earth looking up at the stars and dreaming of walking on distant worlds. She thought of explorers pushing into unknown space not because it was safe or logical, but because it was there. She thought of artists and poets and musicians, trying to capture the vast beauty of the cosmos in forms that other humans could understand and share. All of that was about to be judged by beings who had long ago stopped growing, stopped questioning, stopped dreaming of becoming something more than they already were. Elena took a deep breath and spoke the words that would change everything. Prove it. The two words fell into the chamber like stones dropped into still water. The silence that followed was absolute. Not one of the thousands of delegates moved or made a sound. Even the translation devices seemed to pause, as if uncertain whether they had heard correctly. Elena stood perfectly still, her chin raised, meeting Zethkar's swirling gaze without flinching. She had just done something that no species in galactic history had ever dared to do. She had challenged the fundamental authority of the council itself. The silence stretched on. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel sweat forming on her palms despite the controlled temperature of the chamber. Behind her, she sensed her team's shock and fear. They knew as she did that she had just either saved humanity or doomed them all. Finally, Sethkar's energy form pulsed brighter, colors shifting from blue and silver to something approaching red. "What did you say?" The ethereal leader's voice was no longer calm and superior. There was something Elena had never expected to hear from such an ancient being. Uncertainty. Elena looked up at the highest platform and repeated the two words that had already begun to shake the foundations of galactic civilization. "Prove it." The explosion of sound that followed Elena's second repetition of those two words was unlike anything the council chambers had ever heard. Delegates across 847 species erupted in outrage, confusion, and something that might have been fear. Translation devices overloaded as beings tried to express concepts of shock and indignation in languages that ranged from pure mathematics to controlled nuclear fusion. Silence. Council Prime Zethkar's voice thundered through every mind in the chamber, cutting through the chaos like a blade. The ethereal leader's energy form blazed brighter than Elena had ever seen it, casting strange shadows across the curved walls. "Explain yourself, human. What do you mean by this? This challenge?" Elena remained perfectly calm in the center of the storm she had created. She had expected this reaction. In the 5 years since humanity had first made contact with the galactic community, no one had ever questioned the Council's authority. Species either accepted membership and followed the rules, or they were isolated until they learned to comply. The system had worked for millions of years. "I mean exactly what I said, Council Prime," Elena replied, her voice carrying clearly despite the continuing murmurs from the galleries. "You claim that humanity is unfit for galactic citizenship. You say we are too violent, too emotional, too unpredictable. You assert that your way of doing things is superior to ours. So I ask you to prove it." Coordinator Prime Vexhal of the Synth-Arcs was the first to respond. The mechanical being's geometric form shifted into what Elena recognized as an aggressive configuration. "This is absurd. The superiority of Council civilization is self-evident. We have achieved technological advancement beyond your comprehension. We have eliminated war, poverty, and disease from our territories. We have created stable societies that have lasted millions of years. Have you?" Elena asked, turning to face the Synth-Arc delegation. "Or have you simply stopped growing? When was the last time your species made a genuine breakthrough? When did you last create something truly new, rather than just optimizing something that already existed?" The geometric patterns that made up Vexhal's form flickered uncertainly. "Optimization is the highest form of achievement. We have reached mathematical perfection. And what happens after perfection?" Elena asked. "What comes next when you have solved every problem and answered every question? What does a perfect species do with itself for the rest of eternity?" Queen of all voices, Suthka from the collective swarm spoke next. Billions of individual creatures moving in perfect unison. "You speak of growth as if chaos and inefficiency are virtues. We have achieved perfect unity, perfect cooperation. Every member of our species works in harmony toward common goals." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "And how long has it been since your species had a new idea? When you eliminate all disagreement, all individual thought, all conflict of opinion, what happens to innovation? What happens to creativity? What happens to the spark that drives a species to become something more than it already is?" The Queen's billions of bodies shifted uncomfortably. "Efficiency is more important than random inspiration." "Is it?" Elena asked. "Then why are you all here? Why do 847 advanced species need to come together to make decisions if you have all achieved such perfect efficiency? Why do you need a council at all?" Speaker of Light's Ral then from the photonic entities flickered brighter, its aurora-like form cycling through angry reds and oranges. "We gather to maintain order in the galaxy, to prevent chaos and destruction, by forcing younger species to follow the same path you did," Elena said. "By making sure no one tries anything new or different. By ensuring that every species that achieves spaceflight becomes just another variation of what already exists." She turned in a slow circle, addressing the entire chamber. "You have all achieved remarkable things. You have transcended physical limitations, conquered death, eliminated conflict within your own species. But tell me this, when was the last time any of you felt wonder? When did you last encounter something that surprised you, When did you last face a problem that your ancient wisdom couldn't solve? The chamber had grown quieter as delegates strained to follow this unprecedented exchange. Elena could see confusion in the body language of species she had studied. These beings were used to making pronouncements and having them accepted without question. They were not accustomed to being challenged to justify their most basic assumptions. High Arbiter Glondax of the sacred geometrists materialized at the front of their delegation. Mathematical symbols swirling in complex patterns. Your questions are irrelevant. We have calculated the optimal path for galactic civilization. Our methods have been proven over millions of years of success. Proven to do what? Elena asked. To create stability? To maintain order? To ensure that nothing ever changes? Yes, your methods have certainly proven capable of that. But what if stability isn't the highest goal? What if there are things more important than avoiding risk? Such as? Zethkar demanded, his energy form pulsing with barely contained power. Elena looked up at the Council Prime and smiled. It was not a diplomatic smile or a submissive one. It was the smile of someone who had finally reached the heart of the matter. Growth, she said simply. Learning. Becoming something more than you were yesterday. You see, honored delegates, humanity is not asking for your permission to be imperfect. We are not apologizing for being young and chaotic and unpredictable. We are asking you to remember what it felt like when your own species were still growing. She gestured toward the vast chamber around them. Look at what you have built. This magnificent station. These incredible technologies, these vast civilizations that span star systems. Do you think your ancestors achieved all of this by playing it safe? Do you think they reached for the stars by always making the logical choice? Dr. Chen had moved up beside Elena, her xenobiology expertise giving her insights into alien psychology. Ambassador, she whispered, look at their reactions. Some of them are actually considering what you are saying. Elena could see it too. In the lower galleries, some delegates were having animated discussions with their neighbors. The temporal scholars appeared to be experiencing some kind of temporal fluctuation, their half-faded forms becoming more solid, and then fading again rapidly. Even some of the ancient species in the highest galleries seemed to be paying closer attention, but not all of them. Zethkar's energy form was cycling through increasingly violent colors, and Elena could feel the ethereal leader's growing anger like a pressure in her mind. Enough, Zethkar declared. You dare to lecture civilizations that achieved mastery of the universe before your species learned to make fire? You presume to question wisdom accumulated over millions of years? Your arrogance is proof of exactly why humanity cannot be trusted with freedom among the stars. Elena felt the weight of that ancient authority pressing down on her. For a moment she wavered. What if Zethkar was right? What if humanity really was too young, too foolish, too dangerous? What if their dreams of growth and exploration were just the fantasies of a species that didn't know any better? Then she thought of the message that had brought her here. The probe that had appeared in Earth's solar system without warning, delivered its ultimatum and disappeared. She thought of the casual assumption that humanity would obey without question, that they would accept judgment from beings who claimed to know better. She thought of every human who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. Every explorer who had pushed into the unknown despite the danger. Every scientist who had asked questions even when the answers were uncomfortable. Every artist who had tried to capture beauty in a form that others could share. Elena looked up at Zethkar and spoke the words that would shatter the Council's comfortable certainty forever. Then prove that your way is better, she said. Show us that 847 species of perfect beings can create something more beautiful, more inspiring, more wonderful than one species of imperfect humans stumbling toward the stars. Prove that your ancient wisdom is worth more than our young dreams. The chamber erupted in chaos once again, but this time Elena could hear something different in the voices. Not just outrage and confusion, but genuine uncertainty. For the first time in millions of years, the Galactic Council was being forced to question the very foundations of their civilization. And Elena knew that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same. The chaos in the council chamber continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Elena stood calmly in the center of it all, watching as 847 species struggled to process what had just happened. Some delegates were shouting in languages that registered as controlled stellar explosions. Others were engaged in heated discussions using light patterns so complex they overloaded the translation systems. For the first time in the recorded history of the Galactic Council, the ancient procedures had broken down completely. Council Prime Zethkar's energy form blazed with colors Elena had never seen before, cycling through the spectrum and beyond into frequencies that made her eyes water. The ethereal leader was trying to restore order, but the other delegates were no longer listening with their usual respectful attention. Finally, Zethkar managed to impose enough quiet for speech. "The human's challenge is meaningless," the Council Prime declared, though Elena noticed the uncertainty beneath the attempted authority. "Our superiority requires no proof. It is demonstrated by our achievements, our longevity, our peace." "Is it?" Elena asked. She had crossed a line now and there was no going back. Either humanity would earn its freedom through this confrontation, or they would be destroyed for their impudence. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at your achievements." She gestured toward the Synth-Arcs. "I see a species so obsessed with mathematical perfection that they replace their own bodies with machines. You gained efficiency, but what did you lose? When was the last time one of your kind laughed at something unexpected? When did you last feel joy at discovering something that didn't fit your equations?" Coordinator Prime Vexhal's geometric form shifted uncertainly. "Joy is inefficient. And yet your own historical records show that your greatest technological breakthroughs came before your conversion to purely logical thinking." Dr. Chen called out from behind Elena. "Your quantum resonance theory, your dimensional manipulation technologies, your first faster-than-light drives, all invented by Synth-Arcs who still had biological brains capable of illogical inspiration." Elena turned toward the collective swarms. "I see a species that achieved perfect unity by eliminating individuality. You have no more wars among yourselves, no more conflicts of opinion. But tell me, Queen of all voices, when did your people last produce a work of art? When did a single member of your species have an idea that surprised even you?" The billions of creatures that made up Queen of all voices Suthka stirred restlessly. "Art is unnecessary. Unity provides all fulfillment required. Then why do your historical archives contain the most beautiful poetry in known galactic literature?" Lieutenant Commander Williams spoke up. "Poetry written by individual swarm members before they were absorbed into the collective consciousness?" Elena moved on to the photonic entities. "I see beings of pure energy who have transcended physical limitation. You can travel at the speed of light, exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, manipulate reality through thought alone. But tell me, Speaker of Light's Realm, then what have you done with all that power? What wonders have you created that couldn't have been imagined by the plasma-based creatures you evolved from?" Ralthan's aurora-like form flickered through confused color patterns. "We have achieved stability, perfect existence." "Perfect stagnation," Elena corrected. "You have the power of gods and you use it to sit in council meetings and judge younger species for having the audacity to still be growing." She turned to address the entire chamber. "Every single one of your species has a story. You all started as something smaller, simpler, more chaotic. You reached for the stars despite the dangers. You made mistakes, you failed, you got back up and tried again. You created wonders that still inspire awe across the galaxy." Elena's voice grew stronger, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "But somewhere along the way you stopped. You decided you had grown enough, learned enough, become enough. You chose safety over wonder, stability over growth, perfection over possibility, and now you judge humanity for refusing to make that same choice." High Arbiter Glondax of the Sacred Geometrists materialized more solidly, mathematical symbols swirling faster around its form. "You speak of growth as if it has no endpoint, but we have calculated the optimal state of existence. We have reached the mathematical peak of achievement." "Have you?" Elena asked. "Then why are you all here? Why do 847 perfect species need to gather together to solve problems? If you have truly reached optimal existence, what challenges could possibly remain that require your collective wisdom?" The Sacred Geometrist's form flickered uncertainly. For several long moments, no equations appeared around Glondax at all. Elena pressed her advantage. "The answer is that you haven't reached the peak of anything. You have reached a plateau, a comfortable resting place where you can convince yourselves that there is nowhere higher to climb. But humanity looks at your plateau and sees it for what it really is, a place to catch your breath before continuing the ascent. And what if you fall?" Zethkar demanded, his energy form pulsing with renewed anger. "What if your reckless climbing leads to the destruction of everything you claim to value?" Elena looked up at the Council Prime and smiled. then we will have fallen while reaching for something greater than ourselves. We will have failed while attempting to grow rather than succeeded at remaining the same. Tell me, Council Prime, which death would you prefer for your own species? Dying while reaching for the stars or slowly fading away in perfect, unchanging comfort? The chamber had grown very quiet. Helena could sense something shifting in the alien delegates, something she hadn't expected to find in beings so ancient and powerful. She was seeing doubt. Real, fundamental uncertainty about choices made millions of years ago. A new voice spoke from the highest galleries, where the most ancient species held court. It was the first time Elena had heard from the Void Walkers. Beings so advanced they existed partially outside normal space-time. The human speaks of growth as if it were an end in itself. The Void Walker's voice seemed to come from empty space itself. What purpose does endless becoming serve? Elena felt the weight of that question. Here was a being that had probably witnessed the birth and death of galaxies, asking her to justify the very concept of continued existence. The purpose, Elena said slowly, is that there might not be one. And that's what makes it beautiful. She looked around the chamber, meeting the alien gazes that focused on her. You have all tried to find the final answer, the ultimate purpose, the perfect state of being. But what if the journey is more important than the destination? What if the questions matter more than the answers? What if the act of becoming is more valuable than the state of being? Helena thought of Earth, of humanity scattered across 12 star systems, of children looking up at alien suns and dreaming of exploring even more distant worlds. Humanity may fail, she admitted. We may destroy ourselves or others or waste our potential in countless ways. But we may also become something none of us can imagine. We may ask questions that lead to discoveries you never considered. We may create wonders that your perfect calculations never predicted. We may stumble across solutions to problems you didn't even know existed. She paused, letting her words sink in. And we will definitely continue to grow, to change, to become something new with each passing day. Can any of you say the same? The silence that followed was different from the chaos that had come before. It was the silence of beings who had not questioned their fundamental assumptions in millions of years, suddenly finding themselves forced to do exactly that. When Council Prime Zethkar finally spoke, his voice lacked its earlier certainty. And if we allow humanity to continue on this path of growth and change, what becomes of galactic stability? What happens to the order we have maintained for so long? Elena looked up at the ethereal leader and gave him the only honest answer she could. I don't know, she said, but I think it will be more interesting than what you have now. The vote, when it finally came after hours of debate unlike anything in Council history, was closer than anyone had expected. 212 species voted to maintain the quarantine. 193 voted to grant humanity full citizenship, and 442 species, more than half the council, abstained, claiming they needed time to reconsider their positions. In the end, the motion for quarantine failed to achieve the required two-thirds majority. Humanity would remain free to continue their expansion into the galaxy. But more importantly, Elena realized as she watched delegates from dozens of species approach her after the session, something fundamental had changed. For the first time in millions of years, the galaxy was asking new questions about old assumptions. Several species announced they were withdrawing from Council territory to reassess their developmental priorities. Others requested human advisors to help them understand concepts like controlled chaos and purposeful inefficiency. Few even asked if humanity would be interested in joint exploration. Missions to regions of space the Council had deemed too unpredictable for investigation. As Elena prepared to return to Earth, she received a private communication from an unexpected source.